Hi, everybody. I'd like to welcome my colleague and friend, Dr. Kimberley Ho Misiaszek, to this Caribbean Migration and Return Migration series. I am really happy that we have her joining us today. And I wanted us to start by having her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about how she got involved in this work.
Thank you so much for having me, Flavia. Again, I'm Kimberley Ho Misiaszek. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a professor at the University of Miami. So I got into this work in the area of migration as a migrant myself, coming to the United States from Jamaica after completing high school there. So I was about 17 years old, and I completed all my college degrees here in the United States, more specifically along the East Coast of the United States, so in cities like Miami, New Haven, Connecticut, in Maryland as well, and New York. And I think a common thread across my experiences living and working as an immigrant in these cities, some less than others, was around my ethnic and cultural identity and how people saw me and how it didn't sort of match how I saw myself or who I said when I said I was Jamaican, for example. It would be sort of like a shock and sometimes a flat out denial, like, no, you cannot be from Jamaica. You don't look Jamaican. You don't sound Jamaican. You must be from China or something, which is a part of my heritage. I wasn't born there, but, my grandparents migrated from China to Jamaica. So we have this, sort of unique, we have this, called Chinese Jamaican. And so, on forums and filling things out in school or at the doctor's office, I just found it wasn't capturing who I was or how I saw myself. And, I didn't think that was a very big deal, but my graduate advisor at the time, who studied racial and ethnic identity and how it affects well-being and, achievement and things like that, deeply encouraged me to reflect on this aspect. How did it make me feel as a migrant? And that is something that led to the dissertation work that I did on kind of Chinese Jamaicans' identity and migration experience in the United States.
That's awesome. And I think you're touching on a few compelling points here. We're more than just the sum of our parts. There are so many different aspects to who it is that we are and what makes up our identities. And it's not always easily captured on a form. The second thing that you're saying is really resonating with the motto of Jamaica, out of many one people. And there's an idea that there's so many cultures and ethnic identities that have mixed together in Jamaica that people may not be aware of because they might racialize an entire country or have a perspective of who belongs there or who is there. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about your work, your studies on Chinese Jamaicans and what it is that you found.
Yeah, I think one of the questions of the dissertation was, who is a Chinese Jamaican? And that was it was an identity that, I can know as an in-group member of myself, but it's also not the only one, right? That is like, I'm not the only person that defines who a Chinese Jamaican is, right? So I can tell you, for example, when I was looking for participants to interview in the study, I had the following criteria, like, do you identify as a Chinese Jamaican, or there's other variations of it, like Jamaican Chinese is how some people like to be called, or Jamaican of Chinese descent, or other variation. Does that person, do the people sort of identify with a variation of that label? I wanted somebody who had lived in Jamaica for at least 5 to 7 years during their formative years, which is defined as from birth up to age 18, because we know a lot of identity is formed around that time in childhood, especially around adolescence. So we wanted someone who lived in Jamaica for at least 5 to 7 years, because what I had found interviewing these folks, some of them not necessarily were born in Jamaica, but they were born outside, maybe in Canada or in England, but then, their parents kind of had them there, but then came back home and then they grew up there. So they grew up and went to school there. And they were there through the ages of 12, 13, 14. They went through formal schooling there. So some of them were mixed race Chinese Jamaicans. Some of them were Black, Chinese, Indian, white, kind of mixed together, but they still felt heavily connected to the Chinese aspect of their identity. And so it was a unique identity. Also, after then moving to the United States, that identity was found to also be in a state of flux, as they start to take on whether they feel connected to the American identity. And so, thinking, as you mentioned, that Jamaica being a country with, the motto out of many one people, we had this British also, the legacy of slavery and Britain kind of ruling in Jamaica. You had these many cultures of, the Jamaican Caribbean creolized identity that's a part of it. You have sort of some, feeling some strong sentiment towards British culture. Then you have some also practices of the Chinese cooking, maybe some of the language, and then coming on to America, tacking on this American identity, and even segments within the American identity of based on kind of what they felt drawn to. Some participants said they felt more aligned with like Black Americans or African Americans and with, white Americans or Asian Americans. So it's a tangle and a mix of many types of values and culture, which could lead to some distress, but also feeling, because you have a foot in sort of every cultural identity stream per se. But then on the forms, you're kind of not really sure who you are, where you fit. And I don't know, it just feels a little bit invisible unless you're kind of with other people who understand that complexity.
You mentioned that it can lead to distress. Can you just clarify that for us?
Yeah, just feeling like not necessarily home or place, population necessarily to be with individuals who can see you for that complexity. Because, again, when, for example, many people would say when I was interviewing them, when they told people they were Chinese Jamaican, they're like, what is that? You can't be from Jamaica because of how you either look or sound. And so not having that support or community to reflect back the ways that they're seeing themselves. And then just feeling like, having a foot in each world, but not having, I think it's that lack of a community, maybe I should say, a lack of that community support to really reflect back who they are to them so that they feel seen, kind of heard and understood.
That's really helpful because one of the themes that's coming up is this idea of having a sense of belonging, in part, is derived from being seen and known and understood for who it is that you are, mm-hmm. and even accepted mm-hmm. for who it is that you are and all of your complexities. Mm-hmm. There are a few phrases that I think you introduced in your work or included in your work that have been helpful to me in understanding parts of this process. Mm-hmm. And one of the phrases that you used is this phrase called acculturative stress. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So acculturative stress, it would be helpful to define acculturation, which is basically the phenomenon that occurs when you have culturally different groups or people come together, and that the phenomena that occurs as a result of that. And so acculturative then stress is some of the negative effects that can occur during this process of acculturation. So feeling like a fish out of water, culture shock, feeling no sense of belonging, feeling a lack of sense of connectedness and social support are things that immigrants and things that I personally too, as a migrant experienced as well. So acculturative stress sort of some of the stressors that can occur in your transition and your adaptation as you move through your migration journey, as you come into contact with the mainstream group.
And do you have any tips, strategies, ways to manage acculturative stress? And I'm thinking in particular of individuals like Chinese Jamaicans who are navigating the United States, people who have multiple ethnic identities that they could possibly relate to or that's inside of them, moving to a place where being racialized is maybe more prominent?
That's a great question. It's how to mitigate, some of the stressors. I would say, because of the invisibility and feeling like you don't belong and feeling like you're not connected or people aren't connecting with you for who you are, it's important for them to find and participate in avenues where they can have that piece of themselves sort of validated. And so I think the role of the family came up a lot in my research. So, just kind of being around family members, going maybe to dinners with them. I remember there were some events too that the Chinese Jamaican Association would put on in the community, maybe attending some of those where you can, sort of feel surrounded by, people who understand you without having so much, having to explain on an intellectual level, sort of who you are. I know the participants also describe faith being important to them. So, finding support through their church or groups that are, Bible studies or groups that are related that support their faith. Those are two primary ones that came up in the research: faith and, needing their community, and, eating the foods that they're used to as well. Being with family and things like that.
I didn't know that there was a Chinese Jamaican Association or associations here in the United States.
Yeah, I think it's in Miami, Florida. I forget the formal name, but there's an organization that holds like a Chinese New Year. That's something that even in Jamaica, I think within the Chinese community, they would hold in Jamaica. And so kind of, I think they're a part of maybe like the Chinese Cultural Association, but it's also infiltrated with a lot of Chinese Jamaicans as well. And a lot of Chinese Jamaicans would go to that, the New Year festival as well.
That's awesome. Is there anything else you think that might be important for migrants coming to the United States from your work that might be useful?
Sometimes some of these migrants, they would leave, family behind, their parents behind. And so anywhere that you can feel connected and validated and supported for who you are, would be an important connection to have upon migrating. And secondly, I think understanding that your identity is complex. It's not necessarily, like the forms on these that they're capturing, for example, the doctor's offices, that they really do overlook a lot of your identity and your cultural experiences, but still remembering sort of who you are underneath all of that, and not letting that dictate or influence, just knowing that your identity is one that's complex and in flux, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to internalize, I guess, that identity that you're forced, the forced choices that you are given.
That's excellent, because we're often forced into choices that are dichotomous or that put us in a box. And we are complex beings, and we are navigating. So we're also changing our perspective of ourselves.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so very much for your time today, and we'll see you again soon.